Hello everyone, I'm back for another update. I'm currently on the Virginia Capitol Trail. I'm walking along it, scouting out this trail for potential future bike rides. This is mile marker 27. Looks like near Shirley Plantation. I'm taking a several mile walk along this pathway that connects up Richmond with Williamsburg in Virginia. About probably 30 to 35 miles from Williamsburg. Continuing in this direction is Williamsburg, and this is part of the 76 National Bike Route. Crosses the whole U.S. It starts in Yorktown, goes to Oregon. As I am planning in the near future another long distance bike ride. Ironically, I'm not on my bike now. I didn't bring my bike with me here. In some ways, I wish I would have. So I am walking a portion of this trail. What I'm going to talk about today is more about climate trends, where things are going to go next with climate, short term, long term. I've been mentioning that we are at the very end of this interglacial period. And that soon ice age conditions are going to return to the earth, and due to cycles that are not fully understood, long-term cycles, and the activities of man will not be able to stop this change once it begins. Activities of man will be puny in comparison to the forces that are going to be involved. Man has really no control over climate, cannot control climate, will not be able to control climate. I've talked about the Younger Dryas event in my last video and how the climate began to warm even prior to that event, which was over 11,000 years ago, according to the chronological record of things from the ice cores in Greenland. That puts us well over, usually interglacials last about 10,000 years. We are way past that, because the climate began to warm prior to that event. Glaciers began to melt. So that means the sun came back to life probably 12,000 years ago. So we're beyond the 10,000 years already. And I've been thinking about, for example, the Maunder Minimum in the 1600s. Was that really the sun beginning to sputter toward the next dormancy coming up, long period? Was that a sputtering? The motor was sputtering. It's starting to run out of gas, so to speak. When we had the Maunder Minimum back in the 1600s. Was that the beginnings of this dormancy I've been talking about, where by some miracle the sun came back to life after the Maunder Minimum and stabilized the climate that was rapidly sinking toward ice age conditions in the 1600s, and glaciers in Europe, or overcoming Europe, the Alps, crushing villages, people were panicking back then, thinking the world was going to end. That I've read accounts of what happened back then in Europe, especially where most of the population lived back then. North America there was not really any records going back that far that are reliable, at least written records or historical. So was the sun beginning to sputter during the Maunder minimum? Was that a warning sign that this active cycle on the sun is going to be in the near future coming to an end, and we're facing a long period of dormancy on the sun at some future point that's going to commence? And this is just the last, since 1850 basically, or 20th century basically, has been a last hurrah for this cycle. Because we're talking, like I said, tens of thousands of years. So several hundred years in the span of tens of thousands of years is nothing in time. I feel that the Maunder minimum, back in the 1600s, when the sun went dormant for a number of decades, was a warning sign as to what could happen in the future. We're nearing the end of this interglacial, and there's got to be a reason. I know people say it's a Milankovitch theory. Again, that involves a very gradual change over a long period of time. I don't feel that explains the ice ages. Something has to happen much more rapidly to bring us out of an ice age in a matter and melt all that ice in a relatively short time. It cannot be the Milankovitch theory alone. This is something that happens relatively quickly. Like the sun could go dormant relatively quickly, and we wouldn't know it's permanent unless decades went by and the sun just never woke back up again. See, back in the 16th, 17th centuries, we had the Maunder minimum. Miraculously, the sun woke back up, and the trend toward colder conditions reversed. Due to that, we were sinking toward ice age conditions back in the 1600s. Historical record shows that in Europe. Got a couple cyclists approaching.
Hi there.
Hi. Yeah, so the problem is when the change that I feel causes ice age in the sun happens, it's going to be too late. And not only is it going to be too late for mankind won't know that the change is permanent until decades will have to go by before mankind fully realizes that the sun is asleep. That's it. It's not waking back up for a long time. Because it did it during the Maunder minimum. And people like Zarkova might just say, well, in 2 or 3 decades, we're going to be fine. The sun's going to come back to life. What are we going to do if it doesn't? If we remain in permanent Maunder minimum solar conditions, which could be the default operation of the sun, we don't know for sure. Only way we would know is if we had records going back longer than 10,000 years. which we don't. And again, what is the Milankovitch cycle? It's 3 different cycles. The first one involves a precession of the equinoxes and the tilt of the Earth's axis, where the time of the year we're closest to the sun varies. Right now, we're closest to the sun in January. That means less radiation in the summer for North Polar regions. But we're heading away from that, toward where the sun is going to be closest to the Earth in the spring and then in the summer eventually. The next cycle involves how circular the Earth's orbit is. Right now it's pretty circular, but there's a 90,000 year cycle where the orbit gets a little more elliptical, which means the sun is closer to the Earth is closer to the sun than it would be at other times during the cycle, or further away in the orbit. I think that's a 90,000 year cycle, and then we have, I think it's a 40,000 year cycle where the axis of the Earth supposedly is a little more tipped than at other times. I think it varies between 21 degrees and 24 and a half, and we're at 23, just over 23 right now. So, and that's moving toward being more perpendicular, I believe, at this point. So that would mean a little less solar radiation for the North Pole in summer. If it's tilted a little less, then it's heading that way. The elliptical, also, the orbit is becoming less elliptical, which means it's going to negate the effect of the Earth being closer to the sun in the summer coming up. It's going to kind of dilute that, because we're not going to be as close in the summer as we potentially could be if that other cycle is working against it. So we're heading toward a period where overall the Milankovitch cycle could enhance the transition to a new ice age, because 2 out of 3 of the factors are pointing toward more ice for the less solar radiation due to orbital variations. But that in itself, I don't feel would be enough to bring on an ice age. You need a reduction in solar output to bring on an ice age. You need less output. So what about on the shorter term? Well, for one, solar cycle 25, it is winding down. Cosmic ray count still remains at 7%, though, a minus 7%. So we still have 130 sunspots. It kind of, again, it's not going to be a rapid drop to nothing, I don't feel. It's going to gradually, over time, start to drop. The activity, we're over 5 years into this cycle. It may be another year before we see cosmic ray count go back up to average, because there's a bit of a lag, I think, with that. Because it jumped last September. or the cosmic ray count came down last September because that's of the higher solar activity last year, and has not recovered since totally. But now if cycle 26 doesn't materialize and the sun goes to zero, that could be a warning that this shutdown has begun, and yet it could just be another minimum period. We're not going to know right away. That's the problem with that. I mean, if cycle 26 turns out to be a normal cycle, then we've still got some time before the next ice age. We got at least decades to go. But we are at the end of the interglacial. That's the bottom line, and there's nothing man can do about it. Carbon dioxide will not be a factor, or levels. So getting into the immediate weather patterns, the trough over the eastern Pacific moved east into the western U.S., brought some very cold weather, a lot of snow to the Rockies, Sierras of California. But now there's signs another trough is going to start over the eastern Pacific. Another push of Arctic air from the Bering Strait area is pressing down south over the eastern Pacific, starting to, which means basically a repeat of what we just saw, where eventually the trough is going to go into the western U.S., bring another round of cold weather and warmth in the east, which is a recipe for severe weather. And I can't 100% say it's intentionally being done. I don't know for sure, but it seems like it could be, because we keep seeing this pattern recurring in the spring. And then around the middle of May, if there is manipulation going on, they're going to manipulate the MJO into a phase that's favorable for a hurricane landfall. Here's nice open area fields. Looking at the MJO, I saw an article a couple days ago about Kenya and Africa suffering drought. They blamed it all on climate change. For recent years, Kenya has had drought conditions. They're on the equator, and normally the intertropical convergence zone comes in off the Indian Ocean and gives them rainfall. In the last few years, they haven't been getting it, blaming it on climate change. I blame it on MJO manipulation, because to get a lot of rain in Kenya, it means North America has to have a colder weather pattern, because phase 2 of the MJO, phase 1 or 2, which it would be, would give them a lot of rainfall, and that leads to colder weather patterns over North America. Problem is that there's even more evidence they're manipulating the MJO, because the MJO is constantly over Indonesia and that area. Places like Kenya are going to get gypped out of rainfall because there's going to be no convection there. There's going to be no convection. They're getting gypped out of rainfall, probably because of MJO manipulation. Whereas places like Indonesia are getting tons of rain all the time, because they're enhancing the convection in these regions so that North America stays in a warm pattern. And thus, when they say, quote unquote, this is the warmest year on record, a lot of people are going to believe it, even if it's fabricated. Because if the weather in your backyard is unusually warm, Most people are not going to look at the whole hemisphere scheme of things with the jet stream and figure out whether it is actual global warming or whether they're locked in a warm pattern in the jet stream that's causing it. There's a difference. True global warming, the subtropical highs are further north in position. It leads to wide scale above average temperatures, and what they're doing now is a lot of the Arctic air. For example, we have a huge cyclone, bomb cyclone almost, south of Greenland in the Atlantic that's pulling Arctic air south. But where is this Arctic air going? It's going to out into the Atlantic, where no land is, no people live. It's not coming down into North America. We got a flow from the tropics here right now. It's coming up out of Mexico, Yucatan. That's why it's so warm. And here's mile marker 26. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk up a little further and turn around, go back to where I'm parked. I think I'm going to walk up to that sign way down there and turn around. Oh, man, this is a really nice looking trail. It is part, again, of the 76 group. Getting back to so where does the MJO look like it's going? It was trying to go into phase 7, but now it seems like it's hanging out in the warmer phases again. And whether that's due to manipulation, and I know it's hard to believe they can manipulate the MJO, but all it takes is enhancing the convection in certain regions around the equator, and that controls the position of the jet stream over North America. And the jet stream doesn't go in a straight line most of the time around the hemisphere. It loops up and down. If you're in a loop where it goes toward the Arctic, you're going to be in unusually warm weather. If you're in a loop that comes from the pole, you're going to be in unusually cold weather. And what they're doing is this manipulation. They're making it so that the warm loops in the jet stream land over populated areas so that people believe in the global warming agenda, more likely to believe it. And the colder loops are out over the oceans or over unpopulated areas, mostly, like we just had over the western US, over the Rockies. How many people realize how cold it's been there lately? Who live in the east, you would never think, being 80 degrees and humid today here, that they'd be getting snow in the Rockies. So that was going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I will be back soon.